Part 3. 41. Why did some Africans collaborate with Europeans during colonial invasion? Give 6 points. There were several reasons why some Africans chose to collaborate with Europeans during the colonial period. First, they may have seen it as an opportunity to gain access to resources or technology that would help their communities become more prosperous and secure. Second, collaborating with colonial authorities could be a way of gaining social status or influence within African societies. Third, by working together they may have hoped to improve their own position in comparison to other indigenous groups who resisted foreign rule. Fourth, many rulers viewed collaboration as a means of protecting themselves and their people from further conquest or exploitation. This was especially true for those in positions of power such as kings and chiefs who sought alliances with Europeans in order to protect their authority. Fifth, through cooperation some individuals might have been promised special privileges such as protection from slavery or improved economic prospects which could benefit both themselves and those around them. Finally, there were also those who simply wanted revenge against rival groups whom they believed had wronged them. Thus allying themselves with European powers enabled them to achieve retribution for previous injustices suffered at the hands of others. 42. Explain 6 advantages of the discovery of iron to African societies. The discovery of iron in Africa had numerous advantages to African societies. First, it allowed them to produce more efficient tools and weapons that increased their efficiency while hunting or engaging in warfare. Second, the new technology enabled them to cultivate more land, resulting in improved food production and greater self-sufficiency for communities. Third, iron smelting also provided an accessible source of metal for crafting jewelry, artworks and other objects which could be used as a form of currency or barter trade with neighboring peoples. Fourth, its availability contributed to rapid technological advancements across the continent such as the introduction of plows which greatly enhanced agricultural productivity. This further led to population growth throughout Africa due to increased access to resources. Fifth, by providing a common material from which people could construct buildings and fortifications they were better able to resist foreign invasions or protect themselves from rival factions within their own society if necessary. Finally, the newfound skill set associated with forging iron also helped stimulate economic activity through creating jobs as well as new markets where goods made out of iron could be sold both locally and abroad. 43. Explain 6 social factors for early interactions in Africa. The early interactions within Africa were largely shaped by 6 main social factors. First, previous conflicts and negotiations between different groups would have had an influence on intercultural relations. This was especially true for those societies who had developed strong trading networks or even become involved in warfare against one another. Second, the presence of powerful rulers and a hierarchical system of leadership provided a structure for maintaining peace as well as creating incentives for cooperation due to rewards such as prestige or protection from enemies. Third, religious beliefs played an important role in African cultures which affected the way people interacted with each other both positively and negatively depending on their particular faith. Fourth, intermarriage between ethnicities further increased integration throughout the continent while also complicating relationships if rival lineages were linked through unions. Fifth, shared customs such as music and dance were enjoyed together at festivals or ceremonies which could either bring communities closer together or drive them apart due to disagreements over style or tradition. Finally, large migrations of people often occurred which resulted in cross-cultural contact being established in areas where it hadn't previously existed. This led to exchanges of goods, ideas and technology that ultimately helped shape African society during its formative years. 44. Missionaries prepared Africa for European colonization. Discuss. The role of missionaries in Africa during the era of European colonization is highly contested and complex. On one hand, some argue that missionaries helped to prepare African societies for colonial rule by introducing Christianity which encouraged a sense of obedience and submission to authority. This was seen as an advantage to Europeans looking to easily subjugate local populations with minimal resistance. However, on the other hand, Some suggest that missionary activity actually had a detrimental effect by facilitating cultural disruption through enforcing foreign ideas and values. This would have undermined traditional beliefs while also potentially creating divisions between those who converted and resisted new influences. In addition, it has been argued that missionary activity may have unintentionally weakened local economies by diverting resources away from production towards religious activities instead, which further reduced Africans' ability to resist external control or exploitation. Ultimately then, there is no single answer, as each context must be evaluated based on its own unique circumstances before any conclusions can be made about how beneficial or not missionaries were when it came to preparing Africa for European colonialism. 45. Why Mozambique attained her independence through armed struggle. Give 6 points. 1. Mozambique was subjected to forced labor and other oppressive conditions under Portuguese colonial rule, which generated a desire for freedom among the population. 2. The Portuguese government continually refused to grant independence, even after decolonization had occurred in many other African countries. 3. A variety of organizations including trade unions, political parties and protest movements emerged to advocate for Mozambique's independence from Portugal throughout the 1950s and 1960s. 4. In 1964, Frelimo, Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, declared an armed struggle against Portuguese forces in order to achieve self-determination. This signaled the beginning of a lengthy guerrilla campaign that lasted until 1974, when Portugal agreed to grant independence via negotiations facilitated by international powers such as the United Nations. 5. During this period, Frelimo were able to secure support from both regional neighbors like Tanzania as well as foreign governments who provided weapons or financial aid. These resources enabled them to continue their fight despite worsening conditions on the ground due to increased repression from Portugal's military presence. 6. Lastly, domestic pressure within Portugal itself also played a role, with rising anti-colonial sentiment pushing authorities towards granting autonomy rather than attempting further subjugation efforts, which would likely fail due to strong resistance from local populations. 46. Examine 6 problems encountered by the Africans during mass nationalism in Africa. 1. Political instability. Mass nationalism in Africa resulted in the emergence of many new governments and political systems, some of which were hastily put together with limited resources or experience, leading to instability and a lack of effective governance. 2. Ethnic conflict. Different ethnic groups often had competing interests and ideologies that made it difficult for them to work together towards common goals. This led to tensions between different parts of society, as well as occasional outbreaks of violence. 3. Economic challenges. Newly independent nations faced numerous economic problems, including inadequate infrastructure, weak currencies, high levels of debt, and low standards living relative to other countries around the world. These issues have been exacerbated by corruption within government structures as well as international isolationism from wealthier states such as Europe or North America, which further restrict access to vital resources or markets for African countries. 4. Corruption and favoritism. Many African countries experienced power struggles between rival factions over control over resources which would be used for personal gain rather than collective benefit. Similarly, nepotism was also rampant, with those close to those in authority receiving preferential treatment over others regardless of merit or need. 5. Environmental degradation. As colonial powers sought raw materials from Africa's natural environment, indiscriminate extraction methods were employed, resulting in unsustainable practices like deforestation that can still be seen today. Combined with long-term effects such as soil erosion, this has caused major ecological damage across large swaths of the continent due to poor regulation or oversight during this period. 6. Cultural suppression. Efforts aimed at creating a unified sense national identity amongst Africans sometimes included attempts to limit cultural diversity by suppressing certain aspects or traditions deemed incompatible with desired state narratives. While not always done out malice, this type behavior could lead feelings resentment among locals who found their beliefs under threat, useful linkages, ancestral ties being cut off. 47. Discuss the impact of the Dutch settlement at the Cape by giving 6 points. 1. Introduction of new economic system. The settlement of Dutch at the Cape had a major impact on the economy, introducing cash crops like wheat and wool that are still important to South Africa today. Other items such as timber, leather and wine were also exported from the area during this time. 2. Establishment of trading posts. The Dutch established trading posts throughout South Africa, connecting people in far-flung regions with each other as well as with Europe. These posts allowed for increased trade and exchange between different groups, which helped to spread new ideas, goods and services across the region. 3. Impact on indigenous populations. Having colonized much of South Africa, the Dutch impacted indigenous populations through both their presence, reducing access to land resources, and by attempting to convert them Christianity. While some embraced it, others felt alienated, leading tensions within communities. 4. Creation on political structures. As part establishing an effective governing regime, the Dutch set up administrative structures such courts, judicial systems. These eventually evolved into modern government bodies, work even today ensuring justice, protected necessary laws enforced. 5. Religious tolerance and coexistence. Despite attempts force conversion certain beliefs onto those living in the colony, Dutch settlers generally observed religious tolerance, allowing residents practice whatever faith they wished peacefully alongside one another or no religion at all. 6. Language development. With many languages spoken amongst African settlement, a pidgin language called Afrikaans formed, become language understood by everyone. Later it developed its own distinct dialects, which then influenced wider development local languages over time. 48. Outline 5 objectives of colonial education in Africa. 1. To spread European values and beliefs. Colonial education was meant to promote the cultural, religious, and political values of the colonizers among African people. This included teaching of Christian mission schools, which attempted to convert Africans to Christianity while imbuing them with European-style morality. 2. To prepare Africans for employment in colonial government. Education served as a means to prepare Africans for roles as clerks or administrators in colonial government offices, allowing them greater access to resources than their peers without a formal education. 3. To create loyalty towards the colonizing power, by providing educational opportunities that were not available prior to colonization. These institutions sought to engender loyalty from those they educated toward both their own imperial nation and its ideals. 4. To teach technical skills needed by modern industry. Colonial officials saw economic development as key part of civilizing Mission Africa. Thus emphasis was placed on teaching vocational training such carpentry, metalworking, agriculture, all skills necessary running industrial system. 5. To indoctrinate native populations about colonialism. Schools also taught students about the greatness European nations, emphasizing benefits imperialism bringing civilized way life. As result, former pupils often became strong supporters colonial rule. 49. Mention 5 advantages of museums. 1. Education. Museums are a great educational resource, providing hands-on learning opportunities for students of all ages and helping to foster an appreciation for culture, history, science and art. 2. Preservation. Museums help to preserve artifacts from the past that would otherwise be lost or destroyed due to natural causes such as erosion or human activities like vandalism or looting. 3. Accessibility. By collecting and displaying items in one place, museums make these artifacts accessible to people who may not have access otherwise. This can include geographically isolated communities or those with limited resources. 4. Community building. Museums play an important role in building community by hosting events, such lectures, panel discussions which bring together diverse groups of people exchanging ideas. 5. Inspiration and discovery. Visiting museums often leads new insights, discoveries. Visitors leave feeling inspired after gaining knowledge they didn't possess before while interacting closely with history's many wonders. 50. Explain 6 characteristics of the first non-exploitative mode of production. 1. Production is based on mutual cooperation. In a non-exploitative mode of production, The focus is on providing everyone involved with adequate resources and conditions to help them produce goods or services in an equitable manner, without any one group exploiting another for their own gain. 2. Labor is freely given. People are not forced into labor but rather choose to do it out of free will. This differs from exploitative models which often revolve around coercion or slave labor. 3. Distribution is equitable and fair. Resources such as food, shelter, money, and other necessities are distributed in an egalitarian way so that no one individual has more than they need while ensuring all have access to basic needs. 4. Technology is shared among members. Non-exploitative modes of production rely heavily on technological advancement within communities as a way of increasing efficiency. However, technology should never be used at the expense of others' autonomy or freedom. 5. Decisions result from consensus building. Decision-making processes should involve collective deliberation amongst members. This allows people to come together, discuss concerns, reach agreement before implementing action plan. 6. Environmentally conscious practices. Non-exploitative modes also prioritize sustainable environmental practices, ensuring land resources aren't overexploited. Future generations can enjoy same benefits current inhabitants receive. 51. Elaborate 6 techniques used by colonialists to obtain laborers during the colonial period. 1. Forced recruitment. Colonial rulers often forced people into labor by either threatening violence or offering rewards in exchange for their services. 2. Debt bondage. People were sometimes coerced into working off debts they couldn't afford to pay, resulting in a form of indentured servitude. 3. Kidnapping and abduction. Colonizers would kidnap and abduct locals from villages, taking them away as slaves or laborers against their will. 4. Penal labor systems. Colonists used criminal justice systems force people work under oppressive conditions. Some cases ended with individuals being sold like property other parts world. 5. Migration incentives. Some colonizers offered incentives migrants come colonies, including free passage, guaranteed employment, educational opportunities those willing make journey. 6. Deceptive recruiting tactics. Propaganda was used to deceive. Recruitment posters promises freedom, wealth upon completion contract when reality far different than advertised. 52. Analyze the problems experienced during the struggle for independence in Tanganyika. The struggle for independence in Tanganyika experienced a number of problems. One issue was the lack of unity among different groups, as some wanted to remain part of British rule while others sought autonomy from colonial powers. Other issues included a lack of resources, inadequate infrastructure, and political instability, which all hindered efforts to achieve self-governance. Moreover, due to religious divisions between Christians and Muslims, there were tensions amongst different communities, making it difficult for leaders to unite behind a shared cause. Additionally, Britain's reluctance to grant freedom posed another obstacle that had to be overcome before Tanganyika could become independent. Finally, external influences such as neighboring countries who were also seeking autonomy created interference in the region, complicating matters further. 53. Discuss 6 contributions of the agents of colonialism to the colonization of Africa. 1. Agents of colonialism facilitated the extraction and export of natural resources such as gold, diamonds, copper, timber and other minerals from Africa to Europe. 2. They provided new technological advances which improved manufacturing processes in Africa and allowed for more efficient production of goods. 3. Agents of colonialism brought Western ideas about education, religion, politics and law to African societies, which transformed these cultures for generations to come. 4. They introduced new systems of government such as indirect rule, where traditional rulers were given greater autonomy under colonial oversight. 5. Agents of colonialism built infrastructure by constructing roads, railways, ports, etc., thus facilitating trade between different countries and continents. 6. Finally, they enabled Europeans to explore previously inaccessible parts continent, giving them access valuable information about geography, climate, political situation in region. 54. With examples show how the establishment of colonial economy affected the African societies. Give 6 points. 1. The establishment of colonial economy disrupted traditional African economic systems of barter and subsistence farming, forcing Africans to adopt a more capitalistic system in order to survive. 2. Colonial powers imposed taxes on the African population which eroded their income and hampered development efforts in the region. 3. The introduction of cash crops such as coffee, cotton, cocoa, rubber etc. pushed farmers away from food production, leading to widespread famine due to lack nutritious diet. 4. Colonial authorities also created monopolies for certain goods and services, resulting in overpricing that caused financial strain local populations. 5. Colonial governments encouraged foreign traders and investors take control industry trade Africa, thus eliminating opportunities local entrepreneurs compete marketplace, eventually reducing number new businesses established by natives continent. 6. Finally, exploitation labor was rampant. Imperial companies hired workers extremely low wages while long hours unsafe conditions led high death rates workplaces. 55. Inherited problems from colonial past are major hindrances to the development of Africa after independence. Justify this statement by giving 6 points. 1. In many African countries, colonial borders were drawn arbitrarily without regard for existing tribal boundaries, which led to a legacy of ethnic and regional tensions that still exist today. 2. Colonial powers left behind an educational system which was designed to create obedient workers rather than encouraging independent thought or creativity, which has limited the ability of these nations to create meaningful development plans. 3. The social and political structures implemented by imperialists often favored their interests over those of Africans, leaving newly independent nations with a structure biased towards foreign capitalists who continued to exploit local resources and labor. 4. The imposition of taxes on citizens without any prior consultation created financial hardship in some regions as people had little means deal with sudden loss income from taxation. 5. Under colonialism, access quality healthcare was not available. General public leading diseases such HIV/AIDS, malaria spread unchecked throughout continent, impairing nations' health and productivity. 6. Finally, corrupt leaders in post-independence governments have siphoned funds away from necessary infrastructure projects like road building, water sanitation system etc., preventing progress development Africa after independence. 56. Outline 5 effects of colonial education in East Africa. 1. Colonial education in East Africa had the effect of creating an educated elite class who were loyal to the colonial government, while leaving out much of the local population. 2. This led to a widening gap between those with access to quality education and those without, creating inequalities that continue into modern-day African countries. 3. Colonial education also encouraged competition among students which pitted them against each other instead of working together towards common goals. This undermined social cohesion within communities. 4. The curricula taught in colonial schools was often based on European models, emphasizing Western values and traditions at expense traditional culture and beliefs native populations. 5. Finally, colonial schools reinforced hierarchies by privileging certain languages such as English or French over indigenous ones. This served further entrench existing power dynamics within society. 57. Explain 6 effects of the pre-colonial contact between the people of Africa and Asia. 1. Pre-colonial contact between the people of Africa and Asia led to the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. This resulted in increased economic opportunities for both regions as well as a greater understanding between their cultures. 2. It also enabled African civilizations to gain access to new technology, such as irrigation systems which allowed them to develop more productive agricultural practices. 3. The contact also encouraged trade along newly established routes which generated wealth and prosperity in both regions by facilitating access markets goods services. 4. The cross-cultural interactions pre-colonial period played an important role shaping modern languages many parts Africa, particularly Swahili Bantu tongues. 5. Additionally, religious beliefs from both continents were shared adopted among peoples further blurring distinctions societies making way syncretic faiths practices. 6. Finally, Intermarriage between Africans and Asians created unique cultural turnovers, create distinct ethnic groups never seen before or since. These are still present various parts world today. 58. Elaborate 6 reasons which made the Boers to escape the Southern African Cape between 1830 and 1850. 1. The Boers were motivated to escape the Cape due to increasing taxes and repressive government policies that limited their economic opportunities. 2. They were also keen to preserve their traditional way of life, which was threatened by British rule as well as the influx of new settlers from Europe. 3. The Boers sought more land for farming and grazing livestock, leading them embark on mass migration known Great Trek 1830s-1850s. 4. Taxes imposed upon ownership slaves proved another powerful impetus behind these migrations. Freedom could be found away Crown's oppressive grasp. 5. The discovery diamonds Kimberley region further enticed trekkers' hopes strike at rich newfound wealth. 6. Finally, some Boer felt compelled leave because religious persecution. They wanted practice Calvinism without interference or restriction. Allure independence promised beyond borders too strong ignore. 59. Analyze 6 methods that were used by the imperialist in imposing rule in Africa. 1. Imperialists imposed their rule in Africa through the use of military force, often involving brutal tactics such as forced labor and massacres. 2. They also used economic coercion to compel submission from local populations by withholding vital resources or imposing high taxes on them. 3. Imperialists employed divide and rule strategies, create rivalries among African tribes, weaken potential resistance. 4. Educational systems were put place teach colonial languages values while at same time erasing African history and customs. This helped ensure they had control over young generations' minds. 5. Missions were sent out spread Christian beliefs under guise civilizing native peoples, though this was likely just another way gain political power region. 6. Diplomatic negotiations with regional leaders sometimes resulted treaties that granted imperial powers access land trade markets favor. 60. How were the East African colonies affected by the First World War? Give 6 points to support your answer. 1. The East African colonies were heavily affected by the First World War, with most of the fighting centering around modern-day Tanzania and Kenya. 2. Large-scale military operations resulted in thousands of casualties and caused significant damage to infrastructure such as railways and ports. 3. The war also triggered a rapid increase in taxes which impacted both local populations and businesses alike. 4. As part conflict, colonial authorities requisitioned food supplies from African farmers leading shortages famine regions. 5. Wartime restrictions on movement disrupted traditional trade patterns, increased prices, goods, services. This had especially deleterious effect rural communities who relied upon markets access essentials. 6. Finally, soldiers stationed region brought diseases malaria typhoid which killed many, spread misery among civilians. 61. Examine 6 factors which enabled Tanganyika to attain independence earlier than Kenya. 1. Tanganyika was able to attain its independence earlier than Kenya due to the leadership of Julius Nyerere, who championed a nonviolent approach towards independence and worked closely with Britain during the negotiations. 2. The British were also more favorably disposed towards Tanganyika because of its smaller population size and lack of ethnic tensions as compared to Kenya, making it less difficult for them to manage politically. 3. Tanganyika's political system prior independence had been relatively stable, thus providing smoother transition, full self-governance. 4. Support from nationalist leaders within country helped expedite process, such as freedom fighter Mwalimu Nyerere himself. 5. Foreign relations played significant role too. France assisted transitioning from colonial power, granting diplomatic recognition early 1960s. 6. Finally, international pressure on Britain regarding colonies Africa likely gave impetus necessary allow it gain freedom swiftly. 62. Migrant laborers were very useful to get capitalists during colonial economy in Africa. Substantiate this statement by giving 6 points. 1. Migrant laborers were essential to the colonial economy in Africa as they provided a reliable source of cheap labor for plantations and other agricultural enterprises. 2. The use of migrant workers also allowed colonial authorities to maintain control over large parts of the population by regulating their movements and limiting their rights. 3. Migrant laborers often worked long hours, low pay, thus allowing capitalists extract maximum profits from land and resources at minimal cost. 4. These workers had less protection than local employees. This included being exempt from taxation labor laws that applied others area. 5. Moreover, people could be recruited en masse quickly with help. Administrators employed recruiters spread word distant areas about potential employment opportunities, attract more migrants needed, fulfill demand rapidly. 6. Finally, it was easier relocated entire workforce when market conditions changed or production needed shift elsewhere without having deal complex social issues associated firing local staff.